communicate better. We're going to walk through how to help your child go from limited or unclear communication to clearly expressing their needs without the whining, the tantrums, or frustrations to get their point across. Okay, the first thing I want to go over is something I hear from parents all the time, which is something along the lines of, my child understands me, but they choose to not respond. I want to be clear that understanding and expressing are two very different things. They require different skill sets. So a child may follow a direction, but still lack the ability to initiate a conversation or initiate communication to express their needs. This belief that your child understands you, but they just choose not to respond, often leads to frustration for both you and the child. And it leads to missed opportunities to teach something meaningful or meaningful ways to communicate. So if you're a parent worried that your child isn't communicating like the way they should, today we're going to help you understand what's actually happening and how to build that communication in a way that works for you, your family, and for your child. So there are three important ways to support communication for your child. We're going to go over the three of them. I will break them down and give you some strategies and show you how to use them at home. Okay. The first one is creating opportunities to communicate. The second one is reinforcing communication attempts. And the third one is teaching alternative communication systems. So let's start with breaking them down. I saw the balloons over there. Did something cool. So the first one is creating opportunities to communicate. It's so important to create opportunities to communicate for your child and be intentional in creating those opportunities, because if everything is accessible and predictable, there is no reason for your child to use their communication. Think about it. If you got paid without having to go to work, you would probably choose to not go to work and still get paid. It's the same for your child. Why use their communication when you already give them what they want and what they need? They don't need to, right? An example of this, or what may look like for you, is that you open all of the snacks for your child, or they maybe vaguely point to the cabinet and you know exactly what they want. Or maybe even a little worse is that you translate to other people for them on what they're saying. So, what can you do in those situations? What you can do is set up moments where your child needs to request, to point, to gesture, so you can create opportunities for them to communicate. So, for example, give them a snack that they cannot open and wait. Pause before you give them the help or before you ask them what they want. This encourages your child to initiate that expressive communication or that request. And therefore, then your child starts using communication to get their needs met instead of being quiet or instead of using tantrums, whining, or any other form that is alternative to that communication. Okay, the second way to support communication for your child is to reinforce communication attempts. This is so important because kids learn that communication is powerful when it gets them something that they want. This is how all of us learn to use language. It helps us get us what we want, right? So, a sign that this may be a good strategy for you to focus on, or an example of what this may look like for you, is that your child says a new word and never says it again, or they inconsistently use the words that they do have. They can produce the sound of the words, but they don't use them. Or maybe you continuously require your child that they say the word perfectly. So, the strategy for this, again, is to praise any attempt, words, signs, visuals, even pointing. Really focus on celebrating the effort over the perfection of their speech. This helps children understand that communication works, which is what we want to teach them. We want to teach them that their communication works, because then your child will be more motivated to keep trying to communicate, which leads to fewer behavior challenges and more communication in the long run. Now, the third way to support the communication for your child is to teach alternative communication systems. This is important because if speaking isn't accessible yet, frustration builds for the child and it also builds for you because you don't understand, right? So, communication does not have to be or does not necessarily mean speech. There are other ways to teach your child to communicate more frequently and more appropriately without having to use their speech. What this may look like for you is that your child tantrums or whines a lot to get what they want instead of an appropriate form of communication. Or they don't speak, but they clearly want something like their toy, and you're able to figure it out, but only because you understand them. So, a strategy for this is to use picture cards, sign language, gestures, or simple communication applications on a device. Any other form of alternative communication to speech is going to be fair game for this. This gives your child a functional way to express themselves. And by functional means appropriate, like an appropriate way to express themselves even if they are nonverbal. So, having a functional or an appropriate way to express themselves leads to less frustration, to less behaviors, and more confidence for both the child and for you as a parent. Okay, now here are the top mistakes to avoid. Mistake number one is doing everything for them. I get it, you want to be helpful or to avoid a meltdown, or you simply already know what they want, so you do it or get it for them. But this does not give them the opportunity to communicate and to be motivated to keep communicating. So instead, wait. Just pause and give your child the time or the space to initiate, even if it's just a look or a sound or something close to a vocalization. Reinforce it, but it's important that you give them the opportunity to communicate. Mistake number two is only rewarding perfect words. And then again, I get it, you want to encourage clear speech, but when you make it so hard, your child actually gets discouraged and they stop trying. So it makes it less likely that they'll continue to communicate in the future. We want to do the opposite. Instead, celebrate all communication, all effort, gestures, pointing, picture cards, vocalizations. Remember that progress starts with small approximations to what we want to see. So, for example, if you're trying to teach them mama, if they say is a close approximation to what we want to ultimately see. And then mistake number three is assuming that no speech means no understanding. Again, understanding, which is what we call receptive language, is very different than expressing, which is what we call expressive language. They require different skill sets. So instead of making assumptions about what is or what isn't, make sure that you focus on teaching, modeling, and supporting your child in the ways that we talked about. So, just a quick recap for today. Helping your child communicate better starts with small, consistent steps. Create opportunities where they need to express themselves, reinforce every attempt, and don't be afraid to use other tools like picture cards or gestures to bridge that gap. Communication is a skill, and all skills can be taught. So, with that, I will open it up for questions. If you have any for me.
Yeah, we actually got quite a bit. So we have a question that came in asking about what's the best way to respond when my child whines or grunts instead of using words for something?
Yeah, I definitely, depending on where your child is at, whether they have some words or not, I would start prompting them or showing them what you want them to do instead. So, the reason why they are whining or tantruming or doing what they're doing to communicate their needs is because they know that's what gets it. So, what we need to do is teach them a better alternative that still gets them what they want without that tantruming or whining. So I would start with showing them to point, to reach, to tap you, and go even look at the cabinet, like even looking instead of whining is going to be better. If they have some words, you can start vocalizing for them and just model the language for them. Model what you want to see instead.
We have another one asking, do you have any guidelines on how we can tell as mothers what kind of communication my child is ready for?
Yeah, I mean, I would generally just observe what your child is doing. So, for example, if they have absolutely no words, depending on their age, then that would be an indicator that potentially some picture exchange, some picture cards, or pointing, are they pointing, are they gesturing? The first thing that we look at in terms of communication is intent. So with their gaze, with their body language, are they facing you, facing the item that they want? Then we look at pointing to request what they want. So I would look at those foundational skills, like looking towards with their body or gaze, and then pointing, reaching, grabbing, and go from there in terms of what you're going to teach next.
We have another one that came in regarding the appropriate level of speech based on the child's age. The mom was asking, or the parent is asking, um, my child's 5 years old and only uses broken sentences. Do you happen to know like what the appropriate speech level is for a child that's at that age?
Yeah, definitely. For 5 year olds, they're typically speaking in basically like full sentences. So if they have broken sentences, what I would do at home is to model as much as you can an appropriate sentence. So based on what they are doing, whether they're playing, like make sure that you're modeling a lot of that language for them. I would also recommend, depending on whether your child has a diagnosis or not, that you check with your primary care provider or that you check with your speech language pathologist to see if there is any other reason why your child may not be speaking in full sentences at the developmental age that they're at, meaning at 5 years old. But other than that, I would recommend that what you can do at home is start modeling those sentences as much as you can.
Okay. Um, Let me see. So this is an interesting question. Is screen time making it harder for our children to talk, or are there certain shows or apps that we can use to help with communication?
That is definitely an interesting question. I wouldn't go far to say that screen or technology is making it hard for children to talk. Specifically, like there are things that screens and technology are kind of like preventing children from, because they get so locked in. We're losing some of those like social interactions, and part of those social interactions include them learning from watching the speech, but it's not necessarily like a causation, like technology is causing this. So, however, there are some shows, or depending on your kiddo's age, that are very beneficial to improving that communication. Typically the shows that I recommend are interactive shows. So for example, if you go to YouTube, like those shows that actually get them moving, that actually require some participation from the child, as opposed to something that they're just passively watching, like a cartoon or something like that, like they're just sitting on the couch watching. So make sure that they are didactic in nature, meaning that they have some teaching embedded in them and that it gets your child active.
Cool. There's another one that came in that says, if my child says a wrong word, do you recommend that I correct them right away or just repeat it the right way and move on? My child has a lot of hard time, sorry, spelling. My child has a lot of tough times with saying words that end with R. So star, car, par, certain letters like that. So I just want to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, if we're specifically talking about functional communication, which is basically appropriate ways to communicate wants and needs, and your child is accurately saying those words in terms of the context. So, for example, if they want the car and they say car in whatever way they say it, if they have difficulty saying the R, I would still honor it and not correct it. You're still, again, praising any small approximation, because what we want to do is encourage communication. So, in order to encourage communication, we can't make it too hard, or they're going to get discouraged. They're going to be like, well, why do I need to talk for if every time I talk, I'm corrected? So, if it's not too detrimental to understanding what he wants, I would still recommend to not correct him and give him what he wants when he uses that language.
Okay. And we have a similar one, but the mom or the parent and the that's asking is basically saying that the child just saying like a different word than what the actual word is. So do you have any suggestions? Do you recommend correcting that before giving them um, whatever the preferred item is?
Yeah, so if I understand correctly, basically maybe the child wants the car, but instead of car, they say ball.
Mm-hmm.
If that is the case, then I would correct it by modeling it myself before I give them the car, but I wouldn't require that they say the word back to me. I just, because again, then you would make it too hard for the child to communicate, and we want to still reinforce every attempt. So, for example, if they want the car and they say ball, I would grab the car, and before I give it to them, I would repeat the word card at least 3 times before I give it to them. So I would go, car. This is a car. Car. Here you go. Just so that like they have that model of what that item is.
We have another one asking if my child screams at dinner when they want more food. How do I teach them to ask nicely without causing a meltdown?
Yeah. I would actually recommend that first you observe when your child actually screams when they want more food. It's very clear that they're probably screaming because they want more food. I am assuming because when you give them more food, they stop the screaming. However, how frequently does that happen? Does it happen every day? Does it happen every other day? So that once you have a clear like pattern based on your observations, you can predict when they're going to scream, so that before they scream, you actually just give them the food. So you actually have already more, quote unquote, for them. And then you model it for them before they scream. You say, more. You want more food. Here's more food. So what you want to do is avoid the behavior and then reinforce it with exactly what they want by giving them it. And that way we teach them that they don't need to scream to get more.
Gotcha. We have another question. Basically, the mom says, whenever we're in a rush, my child whines for help. I'm always uncertain on like if I'm supposed to stop in that moment and make them use words, or if I'm just supposed to help them and keep moving. What do you suggest in circumstances where like you're rushing to, uh, go on a trip or go to school and your child's whining for help?
Yeah, I initially thought you said they were on the road. So if you're on the road, please don't stop to help the child. Just give it. It's okay. Something to keep in mind is that consistency doesn't mean perfection. Consistency is like just be consistent as much as you can, right? Maybe the 80-20 rule, if you're consistent 80% of the time, and that 20% can be, will have those mistakes or those times off. So if you are rushing or you really like cannot stop, um, then I would recommend that you just model. That's the easiest way that you can get some quote unquote practice in without requiring anything from your child. So if they're whining because they need help, then I would just say, tell me you need help. Like give them the language already without requiring it from them. If you're in a rush, this is the strategy I would use. Now, however, I would recommend that if you do have the extra 30 seconds to stop and actually make it a teaching moment, that is going to be what is going to give you the most long-term success in terms of getting your child to communicate more frequently, better, and have less tantrums and less whining for you.
Gotcha. We have a kind of a follow up to that. Whenever I model the words I want them to use, they often will ignore me. Do you know if there's like what can I typically do next after that?
I would actually start out looking what ignoring means to you. If you mean ignoring because they didn't say back or because they didn't respond at all, then I would probably say that they're not ignoring. Again, communication has different processes. So understanding and expressing communication, it have different skill sets. So just because they don't respond to anything doesn't mean that they're not taking the information in. So if they are present, looking at you, not talking about something else, not playing with the dog, like if they're actually with their body language telling you that they're listening, then I would leave it at that. Now, if they are, say, interrupting you and talking about the car or talking to the dog or doing whatever else, make sure that you redirect their attention to you. So you grab their body or their name gently and then be like, hey, I'm giving you some type of information, pay attention. So just get their attention again. And that's what I would do.
Um, how can I tell if my child isn't talking because they don't know how to or because they just don't want to?
That is a great question. Generally speaking, I would say that rarely do children not speak because they don't want to. They may feel like innately don't want to. They want to communicate, to have their needs met and express themselves and everything. What typically prevents them from communication are other challenges, whether it's motivation or some type of emotional reaction or something like that. So, what I would look at is like, when does my child speak or when does my child communicate, and then look at really observe at what those instances are. Is it with certain people? Is it with certain items that they really want? And then you'll start forming kind of like an idea of, well, if these are the instances of which my child communicates, what are the instances in which they don't, and what is the difference between them? Because again, it's probably something that it's not due to them not wanting to communicate.
Gotcha. And then we have a final question before we wrap up. We have a lot of questions today, but this one seems a little bit different. Um, so, how do I talk to family members like grandparents or babysitters or the nanny who often gives in to whining? Um, so, oftentimes, whenever they come visit or if we're about to go out for dinner and the babysitter comes, she will let us know that if she whines, she'll kind of just reinforce that. So, we're all trying to encourage the same type of communication style. Is there any tips that you have on that or for family members or spouses?
I really love this question because no matter what the topic is, there's always a question of how do I get everybody else on board? And I have two kind of points or things to share. The first one is um, you don't need anybody else to change in the child's environment in order to make progress. What that means is as long as you are consistent and you establish um, those reinforcing moments for your child and you establish those like communication strategies, your child will pick up and on that and eventually generalize to other people with, of course, appropriate support. So I don't want anybody to feel discouraged that just because their family members are not on board, their child cannot make progress. So if it's really tough to get your family on board, really focus on doubling down on what you're doing with your child. You don't need them to change in order to make progress with your child. And the second point to that is that if you are really looking for like the strategy to get your family members on board, is like I would really just establish clear expectations with them. So maybe show them what you want them to do, or tell them what is the long term change that you are trying to seek and how they can help you in that journey. A lot of the times what I see with families with grandparents or maybe nannies is that everybody has different beliefs and different perspectives about how something should go for the child, and without contextual information from usually the parent, because you're the one in charge of guiding your child's journey, then they don't really understand. So they default to whatever they think should be. So oftentimes, a conversation, an alignment, an expectation set for them usually helps get them on board.
Awesome. Well, sweet. Well, that's it for today.
Awesome. All right.